Do you really believe what you think you believe? And do you believe what your parents believe? These are major questions that you need to ask yourself, especially before you get in any serious relationship. But really, what's the big deal? Why do you need to know, and why should you be learning that right now? It's because when you transition into independence, one of three things is going to happen. And we'll talk about the first path, and that is the go with the flow path. You know what? You get your first job, and maybe you thought about it a little bit, and maybe you didn't. And what happens is that birds of a feather flock together, or the people that you hang around become your major influence in life rather than your solid biblical principles. So that is great if the people that you work with are Christians, and that has happened. I went to college, and my entire college time while I was working, almost everybody I worked with was a Christian, not just a Christian, but somebody that I went to church with. And so we were really supportive of each other in our morals. But when I was in high school, I worked at a job where nobody was a Christian, and I found myself, I really wanted to do right. I did, but I found myself hanging around the homosexual crowd. I listened to the music that they listened to. I swore even though I didn't really want to. All the while I was going to church because I wanted to do what was right. But my influences really pulled me in a direction that I hadn't anticipated. I had my core beliefs, but they weren't really solid and weren't really real to me. And it wasn't until later when I had to ask myself, well, does the Bible really say anything about swearing? Is this even really wrong? And what about homosexuality? Does God address that, or is this just something that conservatives don't like? And so I had to address those things, but thankfully I didn't stay at that job and around those influences very long. God let me move somewhere else where my influences completely supported that conservative lifestyle. But a conservative lifestyle or not, that doesn't stick if you don't believe it. So you will find yourself going with the flow of whoever your social peers and your social pressure is, usually in your workforce, and you will find yourself following that type of life, and that can have a disastrous effect. The second thing that happens when you're not solid in why you believe what you believe, you are going to be challenged in those. Whether it's more of a blatant challenge, I go to college and my professor is telling me that there is no God and that I'm an idiot for believing that there's a God and everything is relative, and the idea of an absolute truth just gets shredded out in the secular environment, because relativism of your truth is true for you and my truth is right for me, and there is no right and there is no wrong, and the Bible is a lot more gray than it is black and white. Do you know that? Do you know if that's true or not? Is the Bible more gray than black and white? Because that's going to come and face you. And what happens when a good Christian leader falls and you find out that that person who you've looked up to your whole life had an affair? And you're like, wait a minute, this is somebody who's supposed to be the prime Christian. How could they do this? This isn't what a Christian is. Or what happens if your parents who raised you a certain way, they get a divorce and then they're not even living for the Lord? Or what happens when an older brother or older sister who you've respected, they completely turn away from everything you've ever been taught about the Bible, and then they kind of look down on you and your relationship splits, and they don't really like you or hang around you, or they feel like maybe you know what I'm saying? Something's gonna happen. Maybe you're in a relationship with a guy that you totally love and think that you're gonna get married to, and then you find out that he's into porn, and it just breaks your heart and you're so bitter. Why would God let this happen to you? And is there even a God? And what happens is that it's like the wise man who built his house upon the rock, and the rains came tumbling down. Is your life built on a rock? Do you know why you believe what you believe? Or are you just believing what you've been taught your whole life? Because Sunday school doesn't go very far in the real world. The third reason why you need to know what you believe doesn't come from your social pressures so much, or from those really faith-trying moments, but this one comes more within the religious element and within ourself. Because never underestimate your own pride. Never underestimate your own flesh and how it will lead you to becoming a rebel or a scorner, and you never even anticipated it, especially in this time of seducing spirits. The God says in the end times specifically that people within the church are going to draw people out of the church, and he says they do it with nice words. Nice words. You really believe them. You believe that their intentions are good and they seem so loving, and yet at the end of your life, you find yourself where you would have never expected it, and it's because you were deceived. You were deceived. And deception, whether it's your self-deception or whether it comes from an external religious person, or maybe it's just your pride that gets flared up. What if somebody questions you and says, what if they judge your motives? Or what if they judge your standards? Or what if they just completely misunderstand you and gossip about you, and they criticize you, and you just get this feeling of, well, who are they? And they can't tell me what to do. And you just become kind of your own worst enemy. You become provoked because you aren't grounded in what you believe and in your faith. Because if you are grounded in creation and archaeological evidence, manuscript evidence, why we use the King James Bible, you understand your doctrine, you understand the doctrines of separation, and you understand the importance of those doubtful disputations and what is gray and what is black and white. And then when somebody comes at you and says, so you celebrate Christmas, huh? Then, or, oh, so you don't celebrate Christmas. Is this a doubtful disputation? Or is this something that the Bible says? And you're not going to find yourself in this huge argument that's all about, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And you get in this contentious, flesh-devouring thing that happens in people's lives, and I've watched it over and over and over. And what happens is they take a stand so hard on something that then their whole life becomes a crusade about that. And it really has more to do with pride masked in righteous indignation than true Christ-honoring spirit of gentleness and goodness and pureness and temperance and meekness and love and joy and peace. And after one or two times of communicating with somebody, if there's not an agreement, then you just let it pass. Matthew 18, it talks about if you have a problem with a brother, talk to the brother and work towards restoration. What happens is that it can put a wedge between you and God because of your pride and the provocation in your own life. And then you find yourself hating everything that has to do with church and anything that reminds you of that time and that religious person and that church and those hypocrites, and you, rather than being able to recognize what the fact and what the real issue was, it's that your whole mind epicenters on an event that really has nothing to do with God or who God is or what the Bible says, but you've let one moment in time or a couple people really define what the Christian faith is to you, and you reject the whole thing. So now you understand why it is so important to know what you believe, because you want to be the wise man who builds their house upon the rock, not on the sand, because when the rains come tumbling down, you don't want your life to go splat and end in disaster. But in the next video, I want you to understand what things you're going to face right off that are going to challenge you and that you need to get a grip on right now.